have you guys sit in front.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do most of the talk, and then when we get to the, so I'm going to have people ask questions as we go, which is fine, because you guys are here. And like, I don't make up answers if I don't know them. But because you guys are here, you can answer more technical questions. That's great. And if you have any stories that you want to tell about specific patients that you might see, just wave at me. You turn your mic on. No pressure. I should feel like really nervous that you guys are here.
Oh, really?
I'm not worried about that.
I always wanted to hear you talk.
Normally I'm the person in the room who goes to also at the Wildlife Hospital.
Yeah.
That's not true anymore.
No, I think you are.
Trust maybe.
You know a lot about the 2.5 years before me. Yeah. It's almost 5 years.
The many years before you actually know that I think about it. Oh yeah, no, you're almost about 2.5. How long have you been working on you guys?
In 5 days, it's my anniversary. 5 years. 5 years. They've not gotten rid of me.
You're still 23.
Exactly. I was never 23 though.
22?
Oh, when I came from interview, I was 23 actually, but then I guess when I started, I was 23.
Oh, I think you said you're 22. I don't know. I think everyone's 23.
I think because I started,
You're 23.
it took me ages.
I don't know how old
I think you was like 23 or something. I was thinking you were younger than what you are. She's
Wait, aren't you?
I almost 24.
Yeah.
No, I think you're not.
No?
And a week after it's up on YouTube. It's just wonderful. You see all their Tuesday clubs.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
That's great.
Right. So I go back and see some of them.
Just see what we do.
And you can tell people if they ever want to see it, that it's there.
I'll wait to see how well I do, and then I'll.
Well, you see how well you go.
So don't just turn it on
When
there.
you're ready, I'll introduce you.
Turn it on and
Is he ready?
I don't know. I just
Right.
spoke here.
All good to go?
I think so.
Good morning everyone, kia ora. I'm Moira Stiles and welcome to the Tuesday Club. Today we're really fortunate to learn about the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital, and it's something I always feel passionate about since I saw that documentary series. So I'll be interested to see if there's an update and where we're at. So we've got three speakers today. Jordana, who's the manager of the Wildlife Trust for the Dunedin Hospital. Emily, who's a vet nurse, and we've got Emma, who's a vet. So I hand over to them. Welcome.
Thank you. Test, can everybody hear me okay? Yep, excellent. So you guys can have a seat. This is a 3-for-1 special. Normally you just get boring old me, but we have pretty low patient load at the moment, and we thought it would be quite good to introduce some of our other
staff members who can answer a few more technical questions than I can, that's for sure. So because there are 3 of us, if you do have questions as we're going through, please by all means raise your hand, and I think between the 3 of us we should be able to answer all of the questions you have, hopefully. How many of you have heard of the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital before? Fantastic. Oh, that's good news. So that means that I'm doing some part of my job right. Now, have any of you, some of you look a little bit familiar. Have any of you seen this talk before, heard me talk before? Yeah, you look familiar to me. All right, that's all right. So hopefully we'll tell you some different stories this time around, but you might already be an expert on the Wildlife Hospital. So let's get going. So what is the Wildlife Hospital? It is pretty much as the name implies. So we are a veterinary hospital for sick and injured wildlife. What sets us apart is we are a hospital only for native New Zealand wildlife. So we don't treat things like possums and stoats, and not domestic, not domestic animals either, no horses, cats, dogs, etc. So just native New Zealand wildlife in our hospital. I'll give you a little bit of some quick facts here. So we opened in January of 2018, which Emily and I were just talking. We can't believe now how quickly that's gone. 5.5 years, that's incredible. We are located on the Otago Polytechnic campus. So if any of you know the old Teachers College building, which is on Albany Avenue near Anzac, that's now the veterinary nursing building, and that's where we're located. We do have a partnership with the Otago Polytech. We're a completely separate entity, so we are a registered charity. However, we are quite well aligned with the Polytech's vet nursing program, and we are located there. This is ever so slightly outdated. That's how quickly things change. We actually have 6 staff members at the moment, so you've met half of us today. So we have 3 wildlife veterinarians, and we have 2 wildlife vet nurses, and then there's myself as the manager of the trust. So we have most of our team is working, specifically working with the animals, and then there's myself kind of behind the scenes. Now I'll draw your attention to this map here. So this is obviously the South Island, and you'll see there is a red line across the middle of the South Island. That's a bit of an arbitrary line. So I put that in there to denote that most of our patients will come from south of that line. So south through down to Rakiura, Stewart Island. Now that is because there are facilities on the south of the North Island that can take wildlife patients, and they might be able to get to them faster than transporting them all the way down south. That said, we will take wildlife patients from anywhere. So if it's a native species and they need our help, we would absolutely accept those patients from anywhere. And certainly we've had them from as far north as Nelson. But yeah, for the most part, that's our catchment area. I'd like to introduce you, although she's maybe the one person who's not here today. This is our founder, Dr. Lisa Argilla. You'll see that she has a whole lot of initials after her name. So Dr. Argilla has spent a lot of time studying to be a vet, and then to be specifically a wildlife vet, and then a further specialty in avian health. And avian health, of course, means bird health, which is quite appropriate for New Zealand because, and you can see this all the way down across the last bit a few years ago. Dr. Argilla was made a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for her contribution to animal welfare and to conservation. So she really saw that there was a gap in services for wildlife here on the south of the South Island. There was no wildlife hospital here before we opened. And as you know, Dunedin styles itself as the wildlife capital of New Zealand. So it only made sense that we had a facility here that could manage some of those endangered species particularly, but all native species. Prior to opening, all of the endangered species on the South Island were being sent to the North Island for treatment. Okay, so that's a pretty significant journey, especially if you think about flightless bird having to fly all the way up to the North Island on a plane. That's pretty significant. And the truth is they were getting quite good care on the North Island at the facilities there, but there was a delay in services. So if you imagine if you fell and broke your leg and you had to travel to the North Island, it would take you 2-3 days maybe before you got that medical care. The outcomes might not be so great. So really the difference is being here where the wildlife is located, and that's what Dr. Argilla envisioned. Now, we are not open to the public, unfortunately. We're not set up that way. We would love to be someday in the future so that people can actually see the work that we do and the patients that we treat. But because we're not open to the public, I'll try to bring the hospital to you in pictures a little bit. So I'll do a little bit of a photo tour. So we have 3 wards in the hospital. So this is the first of 3 wards. This is our seabird ward. So as you can imagine, and as the name implies, we do try to keep things simple. This is the room where we would take care of all of our seabird patients. So you can see Dr. Arguilla here has a hoiho, or yellow-eyed penguin, in her arms. So this is where we would treat all of our penguin species, gulls, petrels, shearwaters, albatross, any other seabird. Very rarely we'll have a forest bird interloper in this ward. Sometimes it happens, but we do try to keep it to seabirds. And you can see all of these enclosures here. I can tell you exactly when this photo was taken, which was in one of our pop-up hospitals before we actually opened full-time. The seabird ward, other than in the dead of winter, like probably right now, like today, this ward will be full of seabirds. In the summer, it is overflowing with penguins. So quite rare for it to be this empty unless it's this time of year. So our other 2 wards pretty much look like this as well. The second is, of course, our forest bird ward. And again, as the name implies, that's where we would treat our forest bird species. Just some examples would be tui, kia, bellbirds, kererū, harrier hawks, any kind of forest bird that you can think of. And occasionally, when the seabird is full to overflowing, we will move some seabird species in there. But we do try to keep them separate. And the third and final ward is our ICU or a quarantine ward. So that's where we would take care of patients that either maybe would need a little extra space. So for example, a takehe, they are creatures that usually have very large territories. And so we would essentially give the entire ward to them, fill it with plants, fill it with things that make them feel comfortable and at home as much as possible in the hospital setting, and give them room to wander. Or, for example, that's where we hand rear chicks. So if we have things like kakapo chicks, quite a precious species, that need to be separated from the rest of the hospital, we can dedicate that ward to those patients. Okay, so 3 wards. We have a surgical theater or an operating theater. As you can see here, Dr. Lisa and Nurse Gina are just finishing up a surgery on a hoiho, or yellow-eyed penguin. And I'll just point out a couple of things because I'm able to move. So you see that there is a foot bandage here. Very common for us to have penguin patients that come in with foot injuries. So largely this is predators biting their feet. So they have foot wounds that often need attention. And although penguins, obviously we think of them as being an aquatic species or a marine species, they do spend a lot of time on land, and their feet are really, really important. So they're moving across sometimes quite far distances, especially during nesting season. So they're not afraid to put their nests in some pretty far away places from the shore and some pretty gnarly places, cliffs, rocks, hills, really rugged terrain. And if they have cuts on their feet or bite wounds on their feet from a predator, and they're moving across mud and poo and other things, it can get infected quite easily and cause a lot of problems. So very, very common to see penguins with foot injuries. And you notice there is also a flipper bandage. We do get penguins that have flipper injuries, no question. They also bitten by predators or other injuries. But in many cases, it's simply because the vet team have installed an IV line. Installed, that's not the right word, but you know what I'm saying. It's not a computer. So there's a dongle, that's another computer term, in a vein there. And the vet team can push medication directly into the bloodstream. I hope I'm getting that. See, normally they're not here, and so I feel like I can just get away with it, but that's sort of right. Yeah, great. So yeah, oftentimes, so if you do follow us on social media, or if you've seen photos or footage of our penguin patients, you will often see that they have the flipper bandages, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're injured on the flippers. It just means that they're getting this kind of attention. So yeah, they will often have that. Yeah, so this is the operating table that we have. And we do, as I said, we treat all native species, so we've had a huge range of animals, creatures on this table. So all really, really tiny things like geckos, for example, or maybe a gray warbler, which is about 6 grams. And then the biggest patient that we had was, on this table, was a New Zealand fur seal. So it was an adult female fur seal, and I think, Emily, you were part of that treatment team, weren't you, when you brought the fur seal in? Yes. Yep, it's ancient history now. It's hard to think about, so long ago. So I'll run you through some of the equipment. Sometimes when we have people, like if a doc staff or an MP or somebody comes through the hospital and gets a tour, they often remark, it's like, oh, it's like a real hospital. It's like, yes, it is quite like a real hospital. So we actually have a whole range of equipment that you would expect to find in a people hospital. But in some cases, it actually, like this piece of equipment in the background, is our anesthetic machine. And that is actually given to us by the Dunedin Public Hospital. So that is a piece of equipment that was used for humans, and they offered it to us when they were getting something probably much fancier, and it still worked absolutely fine. So we gladly took that, saved us about $50,000. And I do like to, I mean, sorry, you've heard this joke before, but some of you in this room may have been sedated by that very machine at some point in the past. Like truly possible, actually possible. And you see here, Nurse Gina's got that mask that she's putting on the hoi-ho before surgery to sedate it. And we have a whole range of masks as well to fit all of our different patient sizes. We do actually also have equipment like a portable anesthetic machine that was made for us. So that allows us to work with animals in the field. So for example, we can transport a 65 kg fur seal into hospital, but we can't transfer a 400 kg sea lion into the hospital. So we could try, I think it would be a very bad day. So we do have equipment that allows us to go out and treat animals in the field. Another example of that would be adult albatross. So we try not to have adult albatross in hospital because they get quite stressed out, and you could really go the wrong way on a patient like that. So we would go and try to treat them in the field as much as possible. Anything else you guys want to say about the equipment so far? No? Good? Okay, passing a test here. We have a digital x-ray machine, which is really, of course, very, very important for diagnostics. So here you see, of course, a Kia on the table being x-rayed, and you'll note that it has the anesthetic machine mask. We can't tell our patients to sit still and not wiggle around, so we do have to sedate them for x-rays. And I'll just give you an example of a patient x-ray. Now, of course, this isn't a Kia. Who can tell me what that is? Not Emily, you don't count. It's a kiwi, that's right, yep. I'll point out a couple of things. I don't think I have a pointer, but I'll just use it. So you see that little white line there on its chest, and you can see the corresponding, it's the same one there on that left side. That's a microchip. So that was actually, similar to the microchip that you would put in your pet cat or your pet dog. So it tells us a whole lot of information about that patient. So depending on the species, they might be marked with these microchips. So this is a species that is highly managed, so the rangers need to know a lot of information about each individual animal. So yellow-eyed penguins, for example, are also microchipped. So if we get a patient if we get a yellow-eyed penguin in the hospital, which we do often, we are scanning them for microchips. The other thing I point out is a little bit trickier for me because I'm not tall enough, but you see there's two triangles on either side. They're very faint on either side of the body up there. That's what's left of the kiwi wings. Not much. They do still have wings, but they've mostly evolved out. We do sometimes see them in hospital when the kiwi are really angry. Right? Like they get a little mad and they kick. But I just think they're adorable and they look like little dinosaurs. We do actually have two kiwi in the hospital at the moment, which is a little bit rare for us. We don't see too many kiwi patients. They came to us from the Queenstown Birdlife Park. So we do care for not just animals that are native species that are out in the wild, but we also care for native species that are in captive environments like the Birdlife Park. And the aviaries at the Botanic Garden as well. We care for their native species. This is an example of a CT scan. So this is another tool that we have at our disposal through a partnership with Ag Research at their Invermay campus in Moskiel. So now and again we have a need to scan a patient with something a little bit more robust than an X-ray. So a CT scan can tell us a lot more about a patient. In particular, we use them for cockapoo patients. So this is a CT scan of a cockapoo chick. So this is, there's been quite a run in the last few breeding seasons of something called aspergillosis. These two could definitely tell you lots more about that than I can. It is a fungal disease, a fungal infection that affects the respiratory system. It can be quite a difficult one to diagnose, difficult to kind of keep track of, I guess. The CT scan gives us a lot more information than an X-ray and helps us understand how a kakapo is tracking with its treatment. So yeah, this is just, I think, quite a cool image. Is a very big deal for Inverme, for ag research, to be scanning something like this. They usually use their machine for cattle, for research. And so when we rang them and said, yeah, we've got our first CT scan, and we told them it was a kakapo chick, they were quite blown away. It was a really cool partnership. A couple more. I'm so nervous with you guys here with this equipment. It's terrible. So just a few more pieces of equipment that we have at our disposal. So does anybody, okay, not you two, want to tell me what's happening in this photo here? Do you have a guess on what might be happening, this penguin? Transfusion, well done. Yes, this is a blood transfusion that we're performing on this toiho. When I say we, I'm using the royal we. I have nothing to do with it, obviously. We believe that this is the world's first blood transfusion on a yellow-eyed penguin. And I know that is so unfair because we're the only place in the world that has yellow-eyed penguins, but we will take any record that we can get. It's sometimes there is it's sort of a, if this patient was catastrophically ill, and this was possibly was a last-ditch effort to save the penguin. And I will just preempt the question. We do not know if penguins have blood types. But we will limit it to species, just to be on the safe side. So we would only ever do a transfusion hoiho to hoiho. And in this case, we did have a hoiho that was being ready to be discharged out to rehab and was deemed healthy enough to donate blood to this penguin. So that is a tool at our disposal. And over here, you'll see we've got a couple pieces of equipment. Syringe driver? Yes, okay. See, I do learn from them. This is a syringe driver, so what it does is it delivers subcutaneous fluids and meds into a patient at a slow rate over time. And it's quite dark, this photo, but you can see there's a kereru in this box. So this is an incubator unit. If you've ever raised chooks, you might recognize that box. So what it essentially allows us to keep a patient at a specific temperature and humidity. So we might put a patient in there after surgery, or if they've just come in to help stabilize them, or we would put perhaps very young chicks in that box to keep them nice and warm. So it's one less thing for their body to do to regulate their temperatures, for example, so we can help stabilize them in those boxes. Chris, how much time do I have left? I haven't been tracking.
About half an hour.
Half an hour, great, okay. I just want to tell a couple of stories about these two pieces of equipment because I think that it sort of highlights how the Otago community has gotten in behind us. Before we opened, and lots of people knew we were gearing up to open and we were doing a big fundraising drive to get our doors open. There were two vets from Invercargill who ran the Christchurch Marathon as a fundraiser for us. So they got people to pledge, per mile or per kilometer or whatever they were running, and they bought us this unit as a result, which was really lovely because they knew that was going to be a key piece of kit for us. And the other one is kind of a funny story about this one. I get all the emails from members of the public. And I got an email one day. It was this lovely woman, and she said, "Oh yeah, my mom loved birds, and she recently died and donated her body to science." And I went, "Okay, I have no idea where this is going." But what she told me, and I didn't know this, is that if you donate your body to science in New Zealand, that ACC will pay for the cost of your funeral. So it's essentially just acknowledging that you're participating in helping make everybody else safer in the country. So the woman said, look, she donated her body to science. She definitely wasn't into a funeral. She didn't want that. She wasn't that kind of person. And so we've asked ACC if they would please donate that money to you instead, because she loved birds and she would have loved what you were doing. And ACC said, well, we've never actually been asked to do that before. We can't just give cash, but we can buy a piece of equipment that would be the equivalent cost of the funeral. And so her family made that choice, which was absolutely lovely. So they were, ACC essentially purchased that for us in that woman's name. So it was a lovely legacy. And we were able to bring her daughter through the Wildlife Hospital to see this in action when she came back to New Zealand. She was living in Australia. So kind of two different stories of people putting their bodies on the line for charity, I guess. I'm not suggesting that you donate your body to science, but it is something that you could do. And then we have some endoscopy equipment as well in hospitals. So Emily, you're in this picture, so maybe you remember what was happening. I don't actually know, but a great example is that we can use these teeny tiny cameras to look actually inside of a patient. And I just recently learned this, is oftentimes, and you're definitely going to correct me, is they make an incision in the side and actually look into the air sacs, is that right, to see what's happening? So one thing that this piece of equipment does for us is it prevents us, it's a diagnostic tool, and it prevents us from having to basically fully open up a patient to see what's happening. So it can really prevent unnecessary surgeries, and it's much harder on the patients, obviously. We can use these cameras also to look down to see if a bird has ingested plastic, for example. Thankfully, I get that question a lot. We don't see a lot of that. And it's hard to know if seabirds are ingesting plastic and just dying at sea, and so they don't come to the hospital, we don't know about it, or if it's simply in the Southern Ocean, not as much of an issue as it is in other parts of the world. So I'm hoping that's the case. But we have had, I think, 2 patients, if I recall correctly, that have ingested plastic. More of an issue is swallowing fishing equipment, which will show up on X-ray because it's generally made of metal. We do have some laboratory equipment as well. So this is Dr. Lizzie. She's one of our other wildlife vets. So she's looking through our teaching microscope, and you can see that it beams this magical picture over to a screen, which is shown there. And what she's looking at is penguin blood cells. So I believe it's probably Hoiho blood, yeah. And what she's looking for is the presence of, I definitely hope I'm not making this up, avian malaria, which is these purple blobs here. So unfortunately, in the last probably 5 years, avian malaria is becoming an issue on the South Island. In the past, it was something that was seen in the North Island, but not down here as much. And that can be attributed to climate change. So things are warmer, wetter, we're having more storms, there's more surface flooding. Mosquitoes are the vector for avian malaria, just like they are for human malaria. So that standing water after floods is a real problem for the mosquitoes. Creates more mosquitoes. So unfortunately, we do now have to contend with avian malaria in our Hoiho population. I don't know if problem in little blues, it can be, yeah. So I guess the problem for the Hoiho is, of course, they're much more critical in terms of their numbers. So yeah, just one more challenge for them, unfortunately, but it is something that we can keep an eye out for in the hospital. So we have a therapy pool out back. This is demonstrated by Horace, who's a giant northern giant petrel. It's really hard to tell the scale in this picture, but this bird is absolutely massive. As the name said, giant is in the name, and he is just a huge, huge bird. The pool is really important for our seabird patients. So we try to get them in the pool if they're healthy enough to do so. For one thing, it cuts down on boredom, so it is a source of enrichment for them while they're in hospital. Our patients don't enjoy being in hospital. They are wild animals, so we do try to give them as much enrichment as we can within reason. And the other reason for putting them in the pool is it helps keep them waterproof, right? So really important for seabirds to be waterproof. It's not always something we would think about, but you can't have a soggy seabird. They need to be waterproof. They're out at sea, especially a pelagic species like this. I guess they're not. These guys aren't pelagic, though, are they? Are they? Oh, I saw them on the subs a lot. The being on the water, it triggers their instinct to preen. So when they preen, they've got an oil gland on their back, and when they clean their feathers, they spread that oil throughout, and helps keep them waterproof, buoyant, and warm and insulated. So I'd probably ask you guys, it's pretty easy to put a patient into the pool. Maybe not so easy to get them out of the pool. How do you get a giant petrel out of the pool?
Fish.
Net?
It is quite a challenge, and it can make us look real amateur. It's a lot of scooping, a lot of net. You do get quite wet, but we're trying more to avoid their beak in this case because they have a lovely sharp hook on their beak that, it's quite painful if they get you. We're really lucky that we have a ramp system now where they can get up onto the ramp, and if they want to go all the way down to the ground they can, or they can stay up higher, which a lot of birds like. We've not had this ramp with a giant petrel yet, so it would be quite interesting to see how they fare. But they also have a really lovely aroma. No sarcasm there whatsoever. So that also, then you're smelling like giant petrol all day as well. So it's pretty glamorous.
I would say all of our vet team members could also act as sheepdogs in another job because they're quite good at herding patients. So you do a lot of herding out of the pool area and into the pool area and out of the pool and into the pool as well. Poor Emily recently had a job of, it was a mollymock, I think. Was it an albatross? Yeah, we had an albatross patient that vomited in the pool. And so poor Emily had to empty it, and there were 9 fish at the bottom of the pool in various stages of decomposition. So it's a really glamorous job as well. A lot of people don't think about this, but there is a lot of food prep involved in the work that the team does at the hospital. So at any given time, we might have maybe 10, 12 different species in hospital, and they might all be eating various different things. So this food prep is a big part of what we do. So this is an example of some of the food. Does anybody want to guess what kind of patient might get this platter? Kia. Who said Kia? Wow, well done. Yeah. Yeah, we did. So her comment was Kia will eat anything, which is mostly true. But we had a patient a while back, a Kia patient that would only eat carrots. Which was we're a bit worried about that because there aren't a lot of wild carrots out there. So she needed to readjust before she went back out to the wilds. Kia platter looks mostly pretty good. I think those are cat biscuits though, so I personally wouldn't eat those. Are they cat biscuits? Pellets. Oh, I always say cat biscuits. That's a better story. Fish, of course, for our penguin and seabird patients. It's nice when they're all on whole fish. Oftentimes they're not. So if we have chicks or really unwell seabird patients, they get a lovely fish smoothie. So that's a concoction that Emily's had the joy of making probably thousands of liters of fish smoothie over the years. You generally know when they're making fish smoothie before you even walk in the front door. It's an olfactory delight, the fish smoothie. And you haven't lived until a bird's regurgitated that onto you. That's fun. This is keradu mix. So this is quite a nice looking salad, I think. So fruits, veggies, and rice for keradu. And that you don't get the scale in that picture, but that's a massive tub. So oftentimes we do have lots of keradu patients in hospital. So we go through quite a bit of keradu mix. Okay, now we'll go through the fun part. I think we do probably have a little bit of time, so I'll run this as a bit of a quiz, and I'll speed up towards the end if needed. I think this group is going to be quite good at identifying their native species. Now you two pipe down, because you know what they are. So does anybody know what this one is here? This is a bird that I almost guarantee you will have heard, but probably not seen. So this is a bird that we have in Dunedin at certain times of the year, not right now. They've migrated to the Solomon Islands for the winter, but this is a shining cuckoo. Shining cuckoo. So masters of camouflage, I think they're so beautiful, these birds. But sort of their claim to fame is that they will locate the nest of a gray warbler, and they will push the eggs out of the gray warbler nest and lay their own eggs in and allow those gray warblers to raise the babies as their own. Which is kind of funny because the shining cuckoo chicks are a lot bigger than the gray warbler parents, but they don't seem to notice. So it's really devious, but also clever. You decide. But this is one of the few forest birds that does actually migrate seasonally. So think about this as a tiny bird, and it flies all the way to the Solomon Islands for the winter. Yeah. So in this last week, I think they made the right choice, right? And it was a little bit too chilly. On the upper right there. Yeah, ruru or moorpork. This is it's mostly adorable, so I wanted to put that in there. This is an example of a patient that has come to us from outside of Dunedin. So this ruru was found in Teanau on a rugby pitch. I think it must have been a rough match. Possibly clipped by a car. We're not sure exactly what happened to it, but was uninjured, so it just came to us for a bit of R&R and a health check to make sure it was not broken, which it was not. It's fantastic. We don't actually get a lot of moorpork in hospital, pretty rare for us. Hopefully that means they're doing really well. Now this one, I'm not going to do this one as a quiz because we did have to check our books when that one came in. So I don't think that you probably know what that one is. This is called a Kerguelen petrel. Kerguelen petrel. So it's quite an unusual one, certainly an unusual one. You wouldn't normally expect to find it in Dunedin or really anywhere on shore for that matter. This is a pelagic seabird, and what that means is they spend all of their time at sea with the exception of when they come ashore to breed. So you would not expect to find this bird on the beach, but it was storm wrecked. So that is something that is fairly common for us to see with pelagic seabirds. So if we have a spate of really bad weather, really stormy weather, really foggy, windy, rainy, they can get disoriented and knocked around in the bad weather and end up on shore. So that one was found on a beach in Invercargill. And thankfully, a lot of the pelagic seabirds that do come to us that are storm wrecked aren't actually injured. So they've lost a bit of body condition, they maybe lost a bit of waterproofing, but they generally just need a few days of rest and feeding up and getting their waterproofing sorted, and then we can release them. We release most of our pelagic seabird patients, the smaller ones like this, at the predator-proof fence at the St. Clair Cliffs, which is a forest and bird project some of you may be familiar with. And the reason that we do that is because these birds can't actually take off from the ground unless they're high up on a cliff. They use the wind to get the lift, or they're on the water. So that's why if you do come across a bird that looks like that sitting on the ground and it doesn't fly away when you approach it, that's a bird that needs help. So it's not going to be able to get itself up off the ground and to safety. Oh, Emily, you're in so many pictures. It's great. Who can tell me what this little bird is here? Well, I think I heard albatross, which is correct. Yep, this is a northern royal albatross chick. Okay, so this is a baby. The photo does not do justice just how big this bird is. It is incredible. And you can tell that it's a baby because it's got all these fluffy feathers. So it's got the downy bit, so it hasn't got its adult feathers in. So this one came to us from Taiaroa Head, where the colony is. And we do take care of their birds there if needed. Like I said earlier, we do try to go out to the albatross if it's adults that need some attention. The chicks, we can have them in the hospital if needed. But we try not to because they take up a lot of space, as you can see. And who can tell me what that is in the middle? Takahe, yes, well done. Sometimes people say pukeka, which is completely understandable because they are cousins and they are both blue. They are both rail species. This is Takahe that came to us from Teanau, the Burwood Bush facility that Doc manages. You can see that the Takahe has some bracelets, as does the next bird. So those are identifying bands. So the rangers, it's a unique combination of colors on the left and the right that tells us exactly who that bird is as an individual. So it's a little bit, it's more of a visual identification than the microchipping. So obviously the microchipping, you need to get close to the bird and scan it. This one, you can see who the bird is from a distance. And does anybody know what that one is on the far right? It's a bit of a tricky one. I heard stilt. Yep, stilt is correct. It's actually a black stilt or a cocky, which is a bit confusing because it's black and white, so it looks like a pied stilt, but it's a juvenile black stilt, a juvenile cocky. So it hasn't had its adult plumage yet. When it's an adult, it will be all black. And you can see this bit here. I think this one had a broken as an external fixator, yeah? On that bird? Ooh, they're giving me the side eye. No, it's not that. So we'll just talk about why they usually come to us. You can see that this bird is like 90% leg. So unsurprisingly, they mostly come to us with leg or foot injuries. So this one, as with many of our cocky patients, likely came to us with a condition called bumblefoot, which is an infection in the foot. So if they get micro cuts on their feet and then walk across, get some dirt or some other material, bacteria in there, they can get an infection and it causes quite uncomfortable, painful swelling in the feet. So that is why most of our cocky patients come to us. And I'll just point out, that's a species that doesn't get a lot of attention. They are quite endangered. So there's only about 160 of these birds left in the wild. So they are subject to a program, a cocky recovery program, that means they take eggs that are laid in the wild out of the wild, and they hatch and raise those young birds to a point where they're big enough and strong enough to defend themselves from predators. So if they didn't take the eggs from the wild, 100% of the eggs would be taken by stoats, okay, taken by predators. So right now their breeding is limited to the Mackenzie Basin, and that's just because of habitat loss. There is a pretty focused predator control program happening in the Mackenzie Basin that's an initiative between iwi and DOC, and that does seem to be making a difference. So we are seeing some eggs that can potentially hatch now in the wilds, which is fantastic. But until said time, we're here to help that program along with their veterinary needs. This is an example of a species that also did not get veterinary attention until the Wildlife Hospital was open here in Dunedin. They are not an animal that can handle flying to the North Island. So they were either being euthanized or just left to fend for themselves, but they can handle the drive from Twizel. So we're happy to help that program. All right, a few more. This is quite a tricky one. This is another one that you definitely have seen. Probably some of you have seen this species today on the way here, but you're just not used to seeing them looking quite like this. No, it's not a tui. It's a good guess though. It's a forest bird. Anyone else? This is a kererū chick. So this is what they look like in their little awkward teenage stage. You can tell it's a chick again. It's got that kind of fuzzy downy feathers. So normally we wouldn't see them looking like this because they should be safely in their nests at this point in their lives. But they do sometimes take a tumble out of their nest, which is exactly what happened here, but thankfully was not broken. But most of our kererū patients come to us because they have flown into windows. How many of you have had a kererū fly into your window? Yeah, it's so upsetting because every time I ask that question, it's at least 5 or 6 hands that go up, sometimes more. So it is quite common. So what will happen is the kererū will see a reflection in your windows of the sky or the trees, and they think, yep, sweet, I'm good. I'm gonna keep going, because that looks like where I should be going. And they don't detect that there's a window there, and they will hit that. And what they'll do is most often they'll break this, what's essentially a collarbone here, the coracoid, or dislocate it. And they can't fly when that has happened. So they'll get grounded and can't take off. So if you do see a kererū or other bird for that matter, just sort of laying in your driveway or in your garden, and it's near the house, if it hasn't moved in about 15 minutes, chances are it has flown into the window and cannot take off. So that is a bird that you need to call the Department of Conservation and have them arrange to get that bird to us. We can fix that, and we fix a lot of it. Kererū, we see about 100 kererū each year, and most of those have flown into windows. There are also these small stickers that you can buy, these decals called Window Alert, and it's a little sticker that reflects a range of UV light that the birds can see, but that we can't see. So it just lets them know, hey, maybe there's something there that isn't quite right, and I don't want to fly towards that. So it's just one small sticker for quite a large pane of glass. So if the folks that had their hands raised that a kererū's flown into their windows, if you're getting repeated bird strike, so if you get multiple birds hitting that same window or the same elevation on your house, that would really be something I'd encourage you to look into. Project Kererū here in Dunedin sells them, and I think the eyesight in the Octagon also sells them. So they're really inexpensive, and hopefully it can avert some crisis for a bird. Chris, how much time do I have left? 5 minutes. Okay, yep, gonna have to speed up. Sorry. I just love talking about these patients. This is a kahu, or a harrier hawk. You see the foot bandage would suggest a foot injury, however, not the case. This came to us because it had lead poisoning, which is a common problem we see for kahu. They will eat the carcasses of rabbits, for example, that were perhaps shot with lead pellets by a farmer or a landowner, and they ingest that lead into their system and it poisons them. So in this case, she was having a neurological reaction to the toxin, and it was telling her to clench her feet like this, and she was at risk of piercing her own foot with her talons, her extremely sharp talons. So this is a bandage that's simply protecting her feet from her own talons. This is an erect-crested penguin on the right, beautiful penguin. Not one you would normally see in Dunedin, but they do sometimes go on a little OE and visit the mainland. Unfortunately, sometimes they do that in the summer during the molting season, which is when they push all their old feathers out and grow in all new feathers. They have to stay on shore to do that, and sometimes it takes 3 weeks. So it's 3 weeks standing in the same spot on the beach. Very boring for them, also very vulnerable to dogs. Okay, so this penguin unfortunately was bitten by a dog, so not a very warm welcome to the mainland. And we've seen every penguin species essentially bitten by dogs. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially in the summer season. Don't let your dogs run into the dunes on the beach where you cannot see the dog, because you may not see that there's a penguin hiding under a bush molting, but your dog can definitely smell it. Okay, just a few more. No, I know what everyone's looking at. This is a karearea, New Zealand falcon. I don't have a story about this bird per se, other than it was a young male that was third time in care. And we know that it was his third time in care because he was wearing a band, so we could get his whole history. So quite an adventure, that one. Minor injuries, thankfully. This is the tui that looks like it's ready to hit the beach. With its jandals. This is very similar to that kahu that we saw in the last slide, which was having some kind of neurological reaction to a toxin and was clenching its feet. In this case, possibly rhododendron toxicity. So there are certain species of rhododendron that can be toxic to our native species. Do not go ripping out your rhododendrons. I have tried to find out what type of rhododendron it is, and nobody knows. But thankfully, it seems that most of the native birds know which ones to stay away from, so it's nothing to panic about. This is Diego. Diego's my probably my favorite patient of all time. Diego came to us with a little bald patch on his back, and when his feathers were regrowing, he was plucking them out. So it was maybe tickly or itchy or something, but he couldn't go back into the water without all of his feathers. So we had to figure out a way to stop him from plucking the feathers when they were regrowing. So this is a great example of sometimes you have to get quite creative. There's not a lot of ready-made solutions for these situations out there. So sometimes we have to make jandals and t-shirts for our patients. Diego went to rehab at Penguin Place out on the peninsula. He decided he liked it so much, he's decided to stay. So he lives on the reserve out there, and he broke up a marriage, stole a wife, and is now making little hoiho babies with a female hoiho that's 14 years a senior. So he's kind of a rock star. Diego, I love him so much. We are super privileged to be able to take care of all of the native parrot species as well, but you can see I wrote parrots equal trouble. So true, they're so challenging, they're super intelligent. This is of course a kakapo, a South Island kaka, and then a kia. And I would say going up in intelligence across the photo. Sorry, kakapo are lovely, but they're not the brightest bulbs. I mentioned enrichment earlier, and that's a really significant part of what we have to do for parrot species in particular, because especially if they're starting to feel better, they start getting into trouble. So we have to find ways to keep them entertained in hospital. We do, of course, mostly take care of birds, but we also do take care of other native species that aren't birds. So just a few examples, a jeweled gecko, a tuatara, which is so cool. They're like dinosaurs. And then that is an example of a New Zealand sea lion pup. So we have had pups in hospital, but not adults, not adult sea lions. Most frequently admitted patients are the hoiho or the yellow-eyed penguins. Last year we had 192 hoiho in hospital. 192 hoiho, which is really significant because there are thought to only be 160 breeding pairs left on mainland New Zealand. Okay, so think about that. It's a pretty significant chunk of the population. This is one of the reasons we have so many patients. This is all yellow-eyed penguin chicks. These are all hoiho chicks. We get them in November when they've just recently hatched, and many of them, if not most of them, will have avian diphtheria, which is why they come to us. So it's a disease that we can treat in a few days if we get them early enough. We've had really, really amazing success with treating these birds and getting them back out into the nests as quickly as possible. But it's a significant portion of our workload. So what? So I've told you a lot about what we do. What does it mean? So just an example of last year, we had 642 native wildlife patients across the year, And that number in brackets is the total amount of patients that we've had through the end of 2022. So from 2018 to 2022, we've had over 2,800 patients. 47 different species we saw last year, which was, we actually added a few new ones last year, which is pretty rare for us to get new species in. And we've seen 87 total different native species across the time we've been open. This number is really important. 62% of our patients hold either an endangered, threatened, or at-risk status. So these creatures need a lot of help. And we can't do it alone, but this is something, the veterinary care is a piece of what we can do to help. But this is the most important number of all, and that is that we have an 80% success rate across all species at the hospital. So that means 80% of the patients that come to us, we're able to successfully fix them and release them back into the wild where they belong. So really, really proud of that number. This is another great big number, $650,000 a year. That's about what it costs us to run the hospital. So spare a thought for me, because it's my job to make sure that we have that money each year, and we do achieve that through a range of partners and sponsors. So just want to take a moment to acknowledge the small and medium local businesses that do support us and help us accomplish that 80% success rate. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Grand. They support our public education, our community education program. So coming out and engaging with folks like yourselves to learn more about what we do and about the species that we help. So just a special thanks to the Grand for allowing me to be here today. And of course, we do lots of things with volunteers, so another acknowledgement to our volunteers who help us do things like clean enclosures. It's not very exciting, maybe prepping some food, or all the way to our governance and people helping us do fundraising. So thanks to our community, and thanks to you for being part of our community education program today. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Anybody have any questions about what we do? Yes.
Who do you guys vote for Bird of the Year?
Ooh, who do we vote for Bird of the Year? Always controversial. But in the last few years, we have backed the cocky or the black stilt. Yeah, so that's a species that we think doesn't get quite enough attention to understand how cool they are and how rare they are, and that this is a species that we can actually help save. All of us, there's a part we all have to play. So cocky for Bird of the Year. But we always vote straight under bird ticket, pretty much. At least I do, anyway. Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Yeah.
How do they get released to the wild? Is it through DOC or other agencies?
Yep, so the question was, how do the birds get released to the wild? So it mostly, unfortunately, not us. We love to do the releases, but our patients will often need to go through a rehabilitation process before they're ready to go back out into the wild. So once they're done with their hospital level care, they might need to maybe put a little bit of weight on, or get their waterproofing up, or just get their flight strength back, or whatever it is, depending on the species. So our rehabbers will generally do the releases. So for example, Penguin Place rehabs almost all of our penguins, and they'll either release them on their reserve, or like Yellow-eyed Penguin Trust will come and get them and release them back where they were found, for example, and DOC as well does releases. Yeah. Other questions?
What's your background? Because you're obviously
Yes, so my background personally is not in conservation or biology at all. I obviously am not from around here originally. I grew up in the US, and my university degree is in cultural studies and comparative literature. Obviously. But I have done, my career trajectory has gone like this. I had to do a major career change when I moved to New Zealand, because the job I did there doesn't exist here. And I actually got into the conservation side of things just by volunteering. I'm quite passionate about animals and conservation in general, so I began my conservation career as a volunteer, and here we are. So that's another big tick for volunteerism as well. You can learn heaps of new skills and get a whole new career out of it. So it's exciting. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yep.
Is starvation still a major issue for the yellow-eyes?
So the question is, starvation is still a major issue for the yellow-eyed penguins. It will depend on what's happening out at sea in a given year. So the last few years we've had La Nina conditions, the climactic conditions that you might have heard about, those patterns, and that can be quite tough on seabirds. So we've saw quite a few starvation cases this year, probably more so than the year before. I think for the yellowheads, there's a whole range of problems, unfortunately. Starvation or food shortage or food competition is one of them. I wouldn't say that it's the major one. In certain years, it is worse than others. And you'll see that that will track with other seabird species as well. Yeah. So if it's starvation, if we're seeing a lot of starvation cases in hoiho, then we're probably seeing a lot of starvation cases in other seabirds as well.
So are you seeing a lot of toroa, the young chicks, where they're waiting for their adults to come back with food? Sometimes it can be days and days before they actually see an old dad to feed them. Has that become an issue for you at all?
I think probably, I don't think so. It doesn't seem to be a problem. They see that they're also, that species is quite managed as well, so they can get supplementary feeding at the nest from the dock rangers, which I think does happen. Yeah, yep. So it may be, you're right that it may be an issue, but thankfully there is already a solution in place. Yeah.
Especially if mum and dad don't come back either. So unfortunately, died at sea, they can have one parent rear and top up and then
Right.
pass away if need be. They not quite well.
Yeah, that's another highly managed species. Yeah.
Well done. I'd like to thank you very much for a really entertaining talk and a very thorough overview of the Wildlife Hospital. I always enjoy the Facebook posts and I shall look at them in a new light now too. And thanks to Emma and Emily for coming and keeping her on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, I just by show of hands, just for my own purposes, how many of you learned something new today? Excellent. That's what I like to see. Awesome. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed that. And if you want to come and have a chat with any of us afterwards, if you're too shy to ask, in the group, we'd be happy to answer your questions. Yeah. Thank you.